The room is still. The emperor of the world is gone. Outside, the August sun burns over Nola, but inside the air is cold. The man who turned Rome from brick to marble lies motionless, his face calm, almost serene, as if the gods themselves were waiting for his next command. But Augustus will never speak again. The unthinkable has happened. The eternal ruler has fallen silent. And now Rome holds its breath. Word travels slowly at first. A whisper carried by trembling lips. Augustus is dead. The man who ended a century of chaos. The man who rebuilt the Republic into an empire. Gone. For a generation he had been the sun around which all power revolved. Every senator, every soldier, every province knew his name as law. But what happens when the sun sets? When the light that bound the Roman world vanishes into shadow? The question burns in every heart, who rules now? The story of Augustus ends not with triumph, but with terror. Because behind the golden statues, behind the marble temples, there was always fear, fear of what would come after him. He had spent decades crafting a system balanced upon his name, his charisma, his myth. And myths, as Rome knew too well, die with the man who bore them. In the hours after his death, silence ruled. The servants waited. The senators schemed. His wife, Livia, stood over his body, a woman carved from ambition itself. Some whispered she poisoned him, as she had so many others who stood in her son's way. But such whispers were as old as Rome, and now she had work to do. The empire must not fall into chaos. The illusion of continuity must survive. Livia's eyes were cold, her movements precise. Before dawn, she sealed the villa. Messengers were silenced. Not a word of Augustus's death would leave those walls. Not yet. Rome must not know that its god had died. She sent for Tiberius, the reluctant heir, the soldier turned cynic. The man Augustus had chosen because there was no one else. He had ruled legions but despised the court. He had power but no love. He was no Augustus, and he knew it. Tiberius rode through the dust-choked roads of Campania, unaware that the world was already shifting beneath him. Behind him lay years of resentment. Ahead, an empire waiting to see if he would stand or crumble. As he approached Nola, the sun hung low, bleeding red across the sky, as if Rome itself bled for its fallen god. Inside the villa, Livia waited beside the covered body. The curtains were drawn. Only a single oil lamp flickered, its flame trembling in the stale air. "He's gone," she said, her voice flat. Tiberius said nothing. His eyes lingered on the shrouded form that had once been the most powerful man alive. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Livia spoke again. "Rome must not know." "Not yet. We will say the emperor lives until the Senate is ready. It was the first decision of a new reign, and it was built on a lie." For days, as Augustus's corpse began to decay, Livia ordered food brought to his chambers. She sent letters in his name, dictated decrees, and ensured that the illusion of life continued. The world believed the gods still breathed. Rome carried on, unaware that it was already living in the shadow of death. And while this strange charade continued, Tiberius struggled with a truth he could not escape. He was about to inherit an empire that might devour him. Augustus had been adored, worshipped, even feared. Tiberius was tolerated at best. The Senate distrusted him. The people barely knew him. And the legions, those restless, battle-hardened men at the edges of the world, were loyal not to him but to their own commanders. One wrong move, and Rome would fracture. Civil war could rise again from the ashes of the dead emperor. The same kind of fire Augustus himself had spent a lifetime extinguishing. Tiberius returned to Rome slowly, his mind heavy with ghosts. Along the way, he received word the Senate was already moving. Senators whispered in the marble halls, weighing alliances, speculating on who might claim the purple. Some dreamed of restoration, a return to the Republic, free from emperors. Others dreamed of power for themselves. But no one truly believed Rome could go back. The Republic was a corpse, and Augustus had buried it well. What survived now was an empire pretending not to be one. When Tiberius finally entered the city, the people greeted him with confusion rather than celebration. Was Augustus still alive? Was this his heir, or a usurper? The streets that once roared for the conqueror of Actium were eerily quiet. The marble statues of Augustus seemed to watch from every corner, their eyes accusing, their presence inescapable. Inside the Senate, the debate raged. Should power die with the man who held it, or should it be passed on, like the crown of a king? The senators spoke of liberty, of tradition, of Rome's ancient laws, but beneath their rhetoric, all feared the same truth. None of them wanted to return to the days of chaos. None wanted another civil war. And so they hesitated. The empire stood on the edge of a knife. Then came the announcement. The divine Augustus, declared Livia, has ascended to the gods. The words echoed through Rome like thunder. Bells tolled, priests wept, crowds filled the streets in mourning. The man who had ruled longer than any before him was gone, and with his death came both grief and relief. The funeral was not merely a farewell, it was a coronation of memory. His body was burned upon a pyre so vast it could be seen across the city. His ashes placed in the mausoleum he had built decades earlier, as if he had foreseen this very moment. The Senate declared him a god. Temples would rise in his name. His image would be worshipped beside Jupiter and Mars. The man who began as Octavian, a frightened boy in the shadow of Julius Caesar, now became eternal. And yet, as the smoke rose into the sky, so too did the question that haunted every Roman soul: who could ever replace him? Tiberius watched the pyre from afar. The flames reflected in his eyes, but not his heart. He had no illusions about the burden now placed upon him. He knew the Senate would test him, the army would measure him, and the people would compare him to a ghost he could never match. Augustus had ruled with charisma, with the subtlety of a serpent. Tiberius ruled with suspicion, with walls around his heart. He had been chosen not because he inspired Rome, but because he frightened it least. Yet the throne of Rome is never safe. Even before Augustus's ashes cooled, rival claims began to stir. Germanicus, Tiberius's charismatic nephew, beloved by the people and the legions, whispered as a possible savior. Sejanus, Tiberius's cunning commander of the Praetorian Guard, saw opportunity in the shadows, and Livia, ever the spider at the center of the web, ensured that her son's path remained clear. Rome had lost its god, but the games of mortals were just beginning. Augustus had built an empire of order. Tiberius would inherit a kingdom of fear, and as the fires of the funeral dimmed, the world began to realize that the peace Augustus created might have died with him. Because peace, in Rome, was never born from mercy. It was built on control, on blood, silence, and obedience, and without Augustus to hold it together, those cracks would soon begin to show. The gods were watching. The Senate was waiting. And in the shadows of marble and smoke, the next emperor took his first uncertain breath as ruler of a world that had forgotten how to live without its master. The age of Augustus had ended, but the story of his shadow was only beginning. Rome was restless. Beneath the marble and ceremony, something sinister stirred. The streets whispered of omens, of thunder without clouds, of statues weeping, of vultures circling the Palatine Hill. To the superstitious Roman mind, these were not coincidences. They were warnings. The gods were unsettled. The balance of power had shifted, and they demanded blood. While the Senate praised Augustus as divine, the empire he left behind trembled under uncertainty. In Germania, the legions waited for orders. They had fought for Augustus, bled for him, and now they demanded a reward for their loyalty. But who would answer them? Tiberius, the silent heir who had spent more years in self-imposed exile than in the capital. The soldiers muttered among themselves, their pay overdue, their discipline fading, What did it mean to swear loyalty to Rome when the man who was Rome was dead? In the northern camps, the name of Germanicus burned brighter than any. He was everything Tiberius was not, charming, brave, adored by his men. He descended from Augustus's bloodline through adoption, a living symbol of continuity. To the common soldier, he was the rightful heir. When the mutiny came, it came like a storm. Drunken soldiers tore down standards, killed officers, and shouted for a new emperor, Germanicus Caesar. They claimed the gods had spoken through the lightning that split the night sky. Rome was no longer one. The cracks were widening. When word reached Tiberius, he did not rage. He did not cry. He simply stared into the distance, his face cold and unreadable. He had always expected betrayal. It was the currency of his world. Send Germanicus, he ordered. Let him calm them. The command was brilliant and cruel all at once. If Germanicus failed, he would die. If he succeeded, his popularity would grow, and Tiberius would have reason to fear him more. Germanicus rode north, carrying with him the weight of Rome's survival. His men greeted him like a savior. They fell to their knees, begging him to take the throne. They offered him the empire, but Germanicus refused. He raised his sword and swore loyalty to Tiberius, commanding discipline, reminding them that Rome was not theirs to remake. His authority, his charisma, these were the last embers of Augustus's legacy, and with them he restored order. The rebellion was crushed, the banners raised again under the name of Tiberius. For now, the empire held. Yet back in Rome, the walls were whispering. Livia's influence grew like ivy over every corner of power. Senators feared her as much as they did her son. She was the silent architect of survival, weaving manipulation into statecraft. Her son might wear the purple, but she ruled his image. Tiberius, for all his suspicion, could never fully escape her shadow. He owed her everything, his claim, his safety, his crown. But love between mother and son had long since turned to calculation. "Do not be weak," she told him. "Your mercy will be your undoing." And Tiberius listened. Slowly, he began to rule not with Augustus's charm, but with iron silence. He withdrew from the public, avoiding crowds, letting others speak for him. He trusted no one. Not the Senate, not the priests, not even the gods. The empire that Augustus had bound with loyalty, Tiberius would hold with fear. He built walls within walls. The Praetorian Guard, those elite soldiers sworn to protect the emperor, became his eyes and ears. Their commander, Sejanus, was a man of quiet cunning. He flattered Tiberius, served him, whispered of threats both real and imagined. And in doing so, he planted himself at the center of power. Sejanus understood the emperor's paranoia better than anyone. He fed it, cultivated it, turned it into policy. The Senate began to shrink into silence, afraid to speak, afraid to disagree. One accusation could end a career or a life. Trials were held in secret, confessions extracted in whispers. Statues of Augustus still towered above the forum, reminders of golden peace. But beneath their gaze, Rome began to rot. It was no longer the peace of Augustus. It was the peace of fear. Meanwhile, Germanicus marched east under orders to secure the provinces. Everywhere he went, the people greeted him as a hero. They saw in him the spark that had died with Augustus. He was the living embodiment of Rome's old glory, and that made him dangerous. In the distant city of Antioch, he fell ill, suddenly, violently. Some said it was poison. Some said witchcraft. Others whispered a name, Piso, the governor of Syria, a man appointed by Tiberius and loyal to Sejanus. Germanicus's wife, Agrippina, wept beside him as his strength faded. "Tell my friends," he whispered, "that I die innocent of all treason." Then he was gone. Another heir to Augustus, dead before his time. When the news reached Rome, the people rioted. They tore down images of Piso, cursed Tiberius, and hailed Germanicus as a martyred prince. The emperor responded with cold composure. Piso was tried, condemned, and conveniently found dead before his sentence could be carried out. Officially, justice had been done. Unofficially, the message was clear: loyalty or silence. Livia, ever watchful, counseled restraint. "The people are fickle," she said. "They will forget him soon enough." But Tiberius did not forget. He withdrew further from the public eye, retreating to the island of Capri, a fortress of cliffs and sea, far from the Senate's reach. There, surrounded by luxury and spies, he ruled Rome through letters, each one stamped with imperial authority, each one colder than the last. The Senate obeyed, the Praetorian Guard enforced, and Sejanus, faithful Sejanus, became the hand that shaped Rome's reality. He decided who rose, who fell, who lived, who vanished. The empire that once celebrated the divine Augustus now lived in the shadow of suspicion. Informers thrived. Neighbors betrayed neighbors. Families were destroyed by accusation. Fear became law. Yet the irony was cruel. In the name of preserving Augustus's peace, Tiberius was dismantling everything that made it golden. Rome's greatness had always been built on belief in its destiny, in its gods, in the invincibility of its rulers. But what happens when belief turns to dread, when the empire no longer loves its emperor, but obeys him only because it fears him? That was the Rome of Tiberius. The marble still gleamed, the games still roared, but the spirit of the city was dying, and above it all, the memory of Augustus loomed like a ghost, haunting every decision, every law, every silence. Tiberius could not escape him. None could. The man who had made Rome eternal had also made it forever dependent on the myth of one man's perfection. Without Augustus, the empire could only imitate greatness. It could never feel it again. The illusion endured, but the soul was slipping away. And somewhere in the labyrinth of his villa on Capri, the emperor stared out across the sea, wondering if his mother had been right. That mercy was weakness. That peace could only survive through fear. And so the golden age faded, not with fire but with whispers. The empire still stood, but Rome's heart had begun to turn to stone. The waves crashed against the cliffs of Capri, eternal and indifferent. They did not care for emperors or gods. They had seen them come and go, their bones scattered beneath the marble of history. From his balcony above the sea, Tiberius watched the horizon old now, his face carved by suspicion and solitude. The empire he ruled was far away, yet its poison reached even here. Messages arrived daily, accusations, confessions, names of the condemned. He read them in silence, then sealed them with his ring. Men lived or died at the motion of his hand. He had become what he once despised, a god who no longer believed in gods. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew Augustus would have hated what Rome had become. But power does not return once taken. The empire was no longer a republic in disguise. It was an emperor's dream enforced by fear, justified by myth, and Tiberius, whether he liked it or not, was its keeper. Yet in Rome, another man dreamed of replacing him, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, once a loyal servant, now the most dangerous man alive. His Praetorian Guard obeyed him more than they obeyed the emperor. His statue stood beside Tiberius's in the streets. The senators flattered him, the people feared him, and Tiberius, isolated, aging, haunted, trusted him. Sejanus had mastered the art of invisible power. He whispered of plots against the emperor, of traitors in the Senate, of conspiracies among the nobility. Each whisper removed another rival, each execution tightened his grip, but ambition in Rome always grows faster than fear. When Livia died, Rome's spider queen, the last link to Augustus, Sejanus saw his chance. The empire was suddenly without its silent guardian. The old mother who had once held her son's sanity together was gone. And with her death, Tiberius began to unravel. The letters from Capri became darker. More paranoid, Sejanus took control of the capital, issuing decrees in the emperor's name, shaping Rome in his image. To the Senate, it seemed only natural. The old emperor was fading into legend. Sejanus was the new Augustus in all but name. Rumors spread that Tiberius would soon make it official, that he would share the empire, that Sejanus would become co-ruler. But power has a cruel sense of timing. In the palace on Capri, the emperor's few remaining allies whispered a warning. "He plots against you," they said. "He wants your throne." At first, Tiberius dismissed it. He had trusted Sejanus for years, yet the whispers gnawed at him. He remembered his own rise, his own ambition, and realized, yes, this is exactly what he would have done. The emperor who trusted no one finally saw the truth in his mirror, and so he set a trap. He wrote a letter to the Senate, long, rambling, full of praise for Sejanus. He called him friend, savior, second only to the gods. The senators gathered to hear it, expecting an announcement that would crown Sejanus as heir. The chamber was thick with incense and expectation. The letter was read aloud, line by line. Then came the turn. In the final paragraph, the tone shifted. The praise curdled into accusation. The words were precise, cold, surgical. "Sejanus has betrayed me," Tiberius wrote. "He has sought the throne. He is a traitor to the Senate and to Rome." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, in a single breath, chaos. Guards burst into the chamber, seizing Sejanus where he stood. The same praetorians who once obeyed him now dragged him out. The senators, stunned moments ago, erupted into a frenzy of loyalty, denouncing him, spitting his name like poison. By nightfall, Sejanus was dead, strangled, his body thrown down the Gemonian stairs, the same place where he had sent so many others. His family followed. His allies vanished. Statues of him were smashed, his name erased. And through it all, Tiberius remained on his island, untouched, unmovable. Rome was reminded once more who ruled it, but victory brought no peace. The emperor had destroyed his last confidant. The world around him was now made entirely of ghosts. He saw plots in shadows, heard betrayal in every whisper. He ordered executions by the hundreds, sometimes thousands. The prisons overflowed. Senators begged for death rather than interrogation. The empire he once governed by delegation became a machine of blood and paranoia. To the people, Tiberius was no longer a man. He was a storm, distant, unseen, but always rumbling above them. The Senate, broken and humiliated, obeyed every order. And in the provinces, men waited for the day the old god would finally die. Capri became a kingdom of silence. The old emperor spent his days wandering among statues of the dead, Livia, Augustus, Germanicus, frozen faces that judged him from every angle. He muttered to himself, sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping, a shadow of the soldier he once was. He had won every battle, but lost his soul, and in the distance, another storm gathered. Caligula, Germanicus's son, had grown into a young man of charm and darkness. Tiberius kept him close, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of curiosity. The boy was quiet, observant, too polite to be trusted. He watched the emperor's cruelty without flinching. He learned from it. He remembered every face that had bowed, every back that had bent. Tiberius saw something of himself in the boy, and something far worse. "Live mindful of what you will one day become," the emperor told him. It was both a warning and a curse. When Tiberius finally died, alone, unwept, at the age of 77, the empire did not mourn. The Senate praised the gods. The people celebrated in the streets. They called him tyrant, monster, madman. They said the nightmare had ended. But in truth, the nightmare had only just begun, because the empire he left behind was not the one Augustus had built. It was colder, harder, more absolute. Augustus had ruled by love and illusion. Tiberius had ruled by fear and survival. The two together had created something terrible, a system that no longer needed its master. The machine of empire had learned to run on its own. Caligula stepped into power surrounded by cheers. The grandson of Augustus by blood, the son of Germanicus by legend. Rome adored him. They called him the new dawn, the return of the Golden Age. But behind that radiant mask, something darker waited. The years of fear had shaped him into something twisted. He had watched the empire consume his family, watched power corrupt and destroy. And now that power was his, the empire exhaled, thinking itself free, unaware that it had merely traded one ghost for another. Augustus was dead, Tiberius was gone. But the system they built, this empire born from ambition and paranoia, lived on, stronger than ever. The marble still shone, the eagles still soared. But the dream of Rome, the dream of virtue, courage, and honor had turned into something colder, immortal, mechanical, eternal. The world would remember the age of Augustus as golden, the age of Tiberius as iron. But history would remember both for what they truly were: two halves of the same coin, spinning endlessly through time, a coin stamped with the face of a god, a coin no one could ever put down. And so the empire marched on, its rulers changed, its people forgot. But the shadow of Augustus never left. It lingered in the marble, in the myths, in the blood that built a world destined to outlive its makers. The first emperor was gone, yet in the echo of his name, Rome continued to breathe, not alive, not dead, just eternal,